So this is a video I wanted to put together. Nothing professionally done. Obviously, my mic is not great. We're not looking at a whole bunch of gameplay in the background. We're just looking at a leaderboard. But what I want this to be is a breakdown of some of the issues that the devs face while dealing with cheated scores in specifically Forza titles, but this generally applies to any video game, and why any one specific strategy is never really enough to handle a problem, and why it may seem like the devs aren't doing a lot, but even if they are doing work, why you may still see cheated scores, or why it may not feel like the devs aren't doing anything, etc. So right now we're looking at the A-Class Horizon Mexico Circuit Rivals leaderboard. And right now we're looking at the world record, the one that's highlighted, the 58.957 by K1Z Levy. Now you'll notice this is at position 233, and the times you can see around this score are not necessarily that far off, right? You can see on this entire page, all of these times are 58s. So if we want to get down into the 57s, we'll have to go to position 208. So that's already 25 scores that we've had to leave on the leaderboard just to leave even less than a second of a gap between the legit world record and, some potential cutoff. But what a lot of people will say is, well, let's just remove the scores that are obviously cheated, right? And let's say that our arbitrary benchmark here will be like half of whatever the legit possible time is, right? Because obviously anything that's faster than that is going to be substantially cheated. So let's just, round up to a minute. Let's go take a look. Let's round the world record up to a minute. Let's go take a look at where we start to see the cheated times fall below 30 seconds. And we actually have to go all the way up to the top of the leaderboard, within the top 10, to even hit that benchmark. So as you can see here, the first score that's cheated that is below 30 seconds is on position 7. So that's, almost, I think it's like roughly 225 cheated scores that just removing the quote-unquote like obviously cheated scores would not actually deal with. So this strategy is kind of problematic in the sense that in some cases like this leaderboard, you're going to have a lot of scores that are much closer to the world record than they are to, some insanely cheated benchmark, and removing the quote-unquote obviously cheated ones is not going to remove the majority of these scores and really doesn't effectively solve the problem, because again, the legit world record would still be over 200 positions down on this specific leaderboard. The next case I want to talk about is the same idea where you remove the quote-unquote obviously cheated scores, but in a slightly different context. So over the lifetime of the Horizon series, it's pretty well known that you will get new cars that are better at doing certain things than all of the cars that already exist in the game. For example, back in Horizon 4, the best top speed car updated a handful of times through the game. And by the end of the game, it was the 599XX Evolution, which was not available in the game on launch and was substantially faster than everything else. And the same thing applies to different kinds of strategies that you can use in different games. So in this case, what we're going to look at is a world record set by a known legit top player. He clipped, obviously, his world record. He shows his strats. I've, found the timestamp in the video where he sets his score, but you can see what he's doing in the rest of the video, and I recommend you check it out so that you can actually get an idea of what's going on here. So this is a strategy that was dug up a decent bit into Forza Horizon 5's lifespan and was not well known before then, and still isn't really all that well known outside of a very niche community, generally speaking. So we'll take a look at what this score actually is, and then we'll break down kind of why this is a potential issue for the idea of removing an obviously cheated score. So, as you just saw there, the player in question just got a 316 mile an hour score on this speed trap. Now, what a lot of people might say is, oh, the Yesco can only do, 312 is the actual max speed that it can do with the best top speed tune in the game. But generally speaking, most people will get 310, maybe 311 if they find some of the better tunes, and only 312 if you drive pretty much like one specific tune in a very specific, delicate way. So you would think obviously 316 is cheated, right? Well, obviously that's not the case. He's using a very interesting strategy here of wheeling the car, which breaks the physics in a weird way that allows the car to accelerate past what it is supposed to be able to do. As a result, this score was achieved using nothing but in-game mechanics, no external tools or anything, and it's deemed legit by the community. However, to most people that aren't aware of what's going on, this may look illegitimate, and the devs may not be aware that a score like this is even possible. So it presents this issue where they're having to make a decision on something that they may not understand. So there will be times where something may look cheated, but it is actually not. So you can't necessarily just say, remove the obviously cheated scores, and then reliably have a clean leaderboard. The next topic that I want to talk about is another thing that a lot of people will recommend, which is we'll just set a cap, right? Don't allow people to go over XYZ score on a leaderboard. And they've tried this. The reality of this is that this has been a very commonly implemented strategy over the history of the Forza Horizon series, and it has been plagued with issues the entire time. So we'll take a look at this clip here. This is a known legit score, but we'll take a look at why it kind of failed this test. So you can see here the player got a score of 315 miles an hour, but he's going to open the leaderboard, and the leaderboard is only going to show on the global unfiltered leaderboard a top score of 304 miles an hour. This is because Forza Horizon 3 had tons of leaderboard caps in place to prevent people from presumably setting cheated scores. Well, the thing is, this is obviously a PR stunt where much higher than that is possible legitimately. So you can't necessarily just set some cap and hope that that's good enough. And now you might say, oh, well, this is Forza Horizon 3. Obviously they've, probably learned from this. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So this is the historical leaderboard tracking sheet for the monthly rivals that appear in the festival playlist in Forza Horizon 5. And in Series 35, the monthly rival was on San Juan Scramble, you got to drive the Jurassic Park Jeep Wrangler. Now you can see here that the listed world record is a 1 minute 40.17. However, if we go over here, you can also see that second is a 140.23. If we go over here, you can see that another known player got a 1 minute 40.198. And what happened is, at least as far as the community is aware, this score was caught by this cap and removed at some point. It made it to the leaderboard, as did the 3 cheated scores above it, but it seemed like at the time that they were purging these scores, every couple of days or something like that. I think this particular score lasted all of like a few hours on the leaderboard before it and the 3 times above it all got deleted. So what happened here was, in Forza Horizon 5, all of almost like just over a year ago, you know, someone set a legitimate score on a leaderboard and it got deleted because it, exceeded some cap that the developers had set. So we just looked at a case where the developers had set a cap on the leaderboard that was too low, and it resulted in legitimate players' legitimate scores getting removed as a result. Well, this is the case of what happens when you set the cap too high. There's going to be this gap in between the legit world record and the cap where players can actually find ways to cheat just enough to get into that specific margin. Now, obviously, drag strip speed trap, you can't do, nearly 348 on, but it goes to show that, clearly everybody up here at the top of this leaderboard has the exact same score. So it's pretty obvious what the cap is. It's 348.97. And every single one of these players managed to figure out a way to get exactly beneath that, such that they're now at the top of this leaderboard. And you can see here, I'm scrolling over 100 people. In fact, almost exactly 100 people have exactly the cutoff score. So there's only so much you can do with setting hard limits on leaderboards, as you're either going to end up leaving some cheated scores on the leaderboard, or you're going to risk deleting legitimate players' scores. So the next topic I want to talk about is, some people might then say, okay, cool, well, if setting a cap doesn't work, removing the obviously cheated scores doesn't work, then just manually remove the cheated scores, right? Surely it can't be that hard. Surely you just hire one person to remove them. Well, we took a look at the drag strip speed trap leaderboard, and we saw that, over 100 people, I think it was 101 exactly, had the exact score at the absolute cap of the leaderboard, right? And that's just the people within 100th of a mile of each other. So, as you can see here, this person made a video where they're going to scroll through that same leaderboard until they actually reach the legitimate world record. And the conundrum I want to point out here is that there are way too many scores for any one person to delete. This is one leaderboard. You have to remember that there are multiple PR stunt types in this game, and 10, 20, I think even sometimes 30 PR stunts of that type, of each of those types. And that's just the PR stunts, right? You also have to include every single track in the game for all of the classes minus X class in the game as well for rivals. So there are tons of leaderboards to have to worry about here. And we aren't even talking about the Accolade leaderboard, the Horizon Realms leaderboard, the Horizon Open XP leaderboard, and so on. There's a ton of leaderboards in this game that are going to require a bunch of knowledge as to what's possible on any given scenario. In Rivals, what car is good for each track, for each PR stunt, what car is good for that, what assists are able to be used on those cars. Sometimes manual is fine, sometimes you have to use manual with clutch, sometimes traction control is better, sometimes it's not, etc., etc. So there's not going to be any easy solution for any one person to go through and deal with all of this, right? So the question then becomes, how would one person actually even know that? And what some people have suggested is, oh, well, you could just have that person reach out to the communities that know these things. Well, that requires a lot of trust, and it can be a lot of work, because now you're having to add in a whole lot of communication into something that should otherwise just be someone's, dedicated role. So they may reach out, not hear back, someone may not understand what they're actually asking and provide incorrect information. There's a number of things that can get lost in translation, and or someone may even intentionally provide incorrect information if the person that, is trying to help out, or was expected to help out here outside of Playground Games, um, is not somebody that's trustworthy, and instead wants, their potentially cheated score to be world record. Well, they just say, okay, yeah, my score is world record, and delete everything above that. So it's a problematic system. It's not something that you can expect one person to do. It's not even something that you could expect one person to do with the assistance of the community without properly vetting the individuals that you'd reach out to help. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people out there to help. There are multiple communities that you can trust, but it's not a good solution. It's not a solution that you should rely on. There should be better ones that are more comprehensive and do not require a substantial amount of work from everybody involved for the number of leaderboards in this game. And I want to point out that while I've been talking for 4.5 minutes, we are only reaching about 8,000 scores. This video goes on for half an hour. And at the very, very end of it, as you can see here, we actually do reach the legitimate world record, which you'll find at leaderboard position 58,000th. And this player is known to be legit, all of that good stuff. But obviously there's going to be a bunch of, Hennessy Venoms that are within X class well above this player. So the only way that you would know if this player is legit is just by simply knowing who he is. And that's not something that I expect the developers to know, nor do I expect, many people in the wider Forza Horizon community to know either. So that kind of approach is not necessarily one that, like I said, is comprehensive, consistent, and is something that should be relied upon. We're going to go back to this video that I've already shown because it illustrates another point that I want to touch on. I've seen some people mention, okay, well, maybe, if you can't remove scores that are obviously cheated without causing issues, you can't set a cap without causing issues, and manually removing scores is too much of a hassle, well, then maybe you could, set some cap, and then if someone beats it legitimately, well, you could then, maybe allow them to submit a clip, right? Well, that unfortunately depends on the developer's understanding that when someone sends in a clip that looks like this, that they recognize that a strategy like this is legit, and that the player in question understands the mechanics of the game in a way that allows them to say that this is a legitimate score. There's not going to be, like I mentioned, this strategy was not well known. It still isn't very well known. And I highly doubt that someone at Playground Games would look at this and decide, oh yeah, sure, that's a legit score, let's put it on the leaderboard. Just visually, it's not something that appears like it would make sense. It's very unintuitive, doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's scores like that, or there's strategies like this all over the place. There's mostly for PR stunts because there's a lot of strange tech there. But even for rivals, if the devs aren't aware of, a new car that they've released being incredibly good for something pretty niche, they might just think, oh, well, someone's cheating, we didn't expect this car to be able to do this, etc., etc. So, things like this that are pretty obviously visually strange may not look legit outside of a very small group of people that probably are not going to have a say in whether or not some score actually makes it on the leaderboard. One thing that I want to discuss before we start talking about some of the things that people talk about when discussing what an anti-cheat should do, what strategies, or what kinds of implementations you should have at that level, I want to talk about something that 3 Clicks Philip actually did a really good job of describing in a brand new video of his. Highly recommend you go watch it to kind of get an idea of how this might work in a different game. But the concept he discusses here is applicable in every single game where cheating is an issue. So you see here he has this spectrum setup where you have your innocent players on one end and you have your blatant cheaters on the other. And in the middle, you do still have those people that are just suspicious, right? You know, they may have a time that's zero point 0.1 seconds faster than world record in Forza Horizon. And they might have been smart. They may have turned off their assists. They may have even used the same car. But there's still going to be just that little bit of suspicion, right? Like, is this really the legit world record? The competitive community might know it's not, but the wider player base may not, right? They may not actually know. But there's still that degree of suspicion, right? You know, if they were at the actual top of the leaderboard and the legit world record was in second place, well, you still want to ask yourself, okay, well, no one knows this player. Is this legit? Even though the time, the car, the assist look legit, you know, all of that to say, no matter what kind of instance you have, there's still this kind of gap, right? And the core issue of implementing any kind of anti-cheat system is that you want to decide which side of this spectrum you want to kind of put your benchmark at, right? Do you want to make sure you get like the blatant cheaters? Okay, cool. Well, then that leaves a window open for those suspicious players, right? You know, if you're only trying to target, like I mentioned before, those obviously cheated scores, you're going to run into issues where people will find that gap between the world record and whatever cap you've set and then set a score within there. And then if you start to go too far into the suspicious players, you may even risk removing the scores of legitimate players and potentially even banning them if your system goes that far. And, you know, I showed this with Drag Strip, Speed Trap, and that one monthly Rivals leaderboard, respectively, where, you know, both of these issues have been seen in Forza Horizon specifically. Another note that I want to add on the kernel level anti-cheat topic is that I don't think a lot of people truly understand just how risky it is to install software in your kernel. So if you're not within the cybersecurity, you know, industry realm, then you may not be aware of an issue that happened last year. CrowdStrike is one of the best antiviruses on the market, and it's very expensive. So usually only businesses will actually get it. I don't think they make a retail level product, but you know, to make sure that their antivirus is as good as possible, it's a kernel level system, or at least has access to the kernel. And what happened is, as you can see here, there was a faulty agent, or a faulty update to their agent that got pushed last year. And as a result, millions of Windows-based systems across the globe experienced a blue screen of death and total system crashes. And this article actually does not necessarily, you know, in this specific sentence, describe the gravity of what was happening. Your kernel is the piece of software that, you know, helps your operating system run. It sits beneath your operating system, but on top of the hardware, kind of halfway in between point. What was happening is that a file that, you know, CrowdStrike had in the kernel was just empty. It didn't have any issues in terms of, like, you know, someone maybe hacked the update, installed something malicious. But what happened was the file just got, you know, potentially corrupted and was sent out as empty. So when the kernel went to look at that file to boot up the computer, it would crash the computer before you were even able to boot into Windows. So these systems were completely offline and out of commission. So as you can see here, the issue disrupted businesses, airports, train stations, banks, broadcasters, and the healthcare section especially, globally. You know, every computer that had this system had a risk of receiving this update and potentially being bricked until they were able to push an update. So this is just a reminder that installing software in your kernel, especially an anti-cheat for a video game, something that's not held to nearly the standard of an antivirus that is used in, multi-billion dollar businesses around the world, is not necessarily something that you should consider to be 100% safe. There is always a pretty significant risk of your computer, you know, being effectively bricked until a potential update could fix any issue. So, kernel level anti cheats, you're welcome to look more into this, and I highly encourage you do, present a pretty substantial risk of their own when it comes to the usability of your system. This doesn't even get into the privacy issues that happen when you start to consider that, oh, this system is in my kernel. It can see everything on my computer and is always running. So it can see everything I do the entire time I use my computer. Because as a result, it has to be running so that by the time you boot up the game, the system is already running. The kernel can't restart without the operating system restarting. So anything that the kernel needs to be running has to be running as the operating system boots up. And then the even worse consideration is, well, what if somebody figures out a way to exploit said anti-cheat, right? What if they manage to hack that, and now they have access to your computer's kernel, and now they can access everything on your computer. So there's a ton of risks involved with kernel level anti-cheats, and I would not expect, I would hope for people to not want them to be the kind of be all end all of anti-cheats. There's a good reason that Steam has not implemented a kernel level anti-cheat for Counter-Strike 2. And the reasons I just listed are probably primarily theirs. I'm not sure if they've openly communicated this, but I know they're pretty staunchly anti-kernel level anti-cheat for a number of good reasons. So you might then think, okay, well, maybe we figured out some system to detect people who are cheating, and we want to make sure they can't play the game again, because, cheaters will, buy alt accounts, they'll buy modded accounts, etc., right? Well, let's just ban them from the game. Well, again, alt accounts, they'll just get right back in, right? Well, let's take it one step further. Let's ban their computer from playing the game. Well, here's where we enter the world of hardware ID spoofers. So, generally speaking, people will understand that hardware IDs are the kind of like identifier that gets banned when any kind of hardware level ban gets sent out. Well, again, I would be worried about showing this if it did not take me 3 seconds on Google to find. I'm not sure, how compatible this is with any game, so I'm not going to make any claims that this is an effective one. But what I can say is that these systems are out there. They do work, not without some amount of risk, but people are obviously using these systems to actually get around hardware level bans and spoof their hardware IDs such that any ban at that level is effectively meaningless to them. So hardware bans also not necessarily kind of an end all be all consistent system for actually dealing with cheaters. So one thing that you might also consider when developing an anti-cheat is, just look for, known cheats, right? See if a player in question has the cheat running. Now, I do want to preface this by saying this is one of the best ways to go about this, and is a system that I would recommend a lot of the time. It generally tends to make cheat development hard enough that people will eventually give up, as is the case for a specific cheat client in Forza Horizon 5. I won't name it, but if you do your research, you'll go and find a handful of cheats out there. If you try to boot them up, you'll probably get banned as a result. The game is able to detect them. But there are things that the game is not consistently able to detect. So what we're looking at here is the S2 Goliath leaderboard all the way back from January of 2022, so way back when the game first came out. And you can see here that the legit world record is at position 2000. And, a fair amount of you might consider, oh, sure, a bunch of cheaters in this game, yada yada. Well, 3 months into the game, actually not even 3 months into the game, that's a lot of cheated scores, right? That is way more cheated scores than I think a lot of games will even see, because it does take time to develop cheats for these games and people won't find out about them immediately. So what happened here? Well, what actually happened here is that there was a glitch at the very beginning of the game where if you made a custom track using the Goliath as your starting point and it was shorter than the Goliath, not hard to do, it's a 9-minute track, the game would mistakenly put your lap time on the rival's leaderboard. And, pretty good chance it's faster than the Goliath world record at 9 whole minutes here. So that's what was flooding this leaderboard with these thousands of quote unquote cheated scores. Now, this issue got patched, but there are still other issues like this to this day. So, some of you may know about the YouTuber Dubs. He was doing the mountaintop danger sign in the Pro Stock Camaro the other day. You can find the video on his YouTube channel, obviously all legit in that. And what happened here is a very well known glitch with danger signs, at least within the PR stunt community. We're not sure at all why this happens, but sometimes when you do a danger sign, the game will just add a bunch of distance to your score. We think it may have something to do with fast traveling, but we've also seen cases where fast traveling was not part of the equation and over a kilometer got added to someone's danger sign score completely for free. Just as they landed, their score just went up a kilometer. They weren't cheating or anything like that. The game just bugged out. What happened here with Dubs, we're not exactly sure. Again, we don't know how this works, but obviously Dubs is a legit player, and you can see here RFND Doe model, he's a known legit player. His score at just over 1,000 meters, pretty safe to say it's legit. And, Dubs has over 3 times that. So, suffice to say, this score is, illegitimate but not cheated. It was not set with the intention of setting an illegitimate score. So, this point is meant to say that you're not going to catch every single score on a leaderboard that appears to be illegitimate with just a system that detects, cheat software alone. There are other issues in this game that still persist, such as entering a Horizon online race in the car you were driving around in the free roam lobby beforehand. And if you queued up for an A-class lobby, but you were driving around an X-class car, there's a chance that the game just puts you in that lobby with an X-class car. It's kind of unfortunate. You're probably, if you choose to race, you'll probably just destroy the lobby. When this happens to known players, they'll just move off to the side, just kind of accept that it happened and move on. But it is a bug that still happens. And as a result, some people might think, they might look at this score on this leaderboard here, or they might see someone in the lobby with an X-class car and think, oh, well, they're obviously just cheating. But the result is, this game does still have flaws, and not all of them have been patched. As a result, not all of the scores you see are cheated, but are still illegitimate. I want to close out this video by saying, again, this is not meant to be kind of some big doom and gloom. The game's never going to get in a state where you can, where they're ever going to deal with, the cheaters, yada yada. I just want to make an educational video to explain, some of the common trends that you'll see with people trying to, wrap their head around how you deal with cheats and how you actually, how game developers go about it, how, some cheaters will fight back, etc., etc. What I can tell you, Forza Horizon 5 does have an anti-cheat. Like I mentioned, if you go look up cheats for the game and if you try to use them, there's a very good chance you will get banned. Even if the cheat works, the game will still detect it and ban you later on down the line. There are systems in place. They're not perfect for the reasons I've discussed in this video, but the developers are doing a substantial amount of work, and I'm sure they're considering, everything I mentioned. We went over systems that they're actively using in the game now, like capping the times you can get on monthly Rivals leaderboards. They struggled for a little bit to make those work, as you saw in the example provided, but as of late, they're not nearly as bad with the caps, and the caps are, you know, not necessarily so bad that the players are really struggling to get legitimate world records. If you want, kind of reaffirmation that this is the case, I recommend you go compare the number of cheated scores you see on the mainland Horizon leaderboards that have been around since the beginning of the game to the Rally Adventure Rivals leaderboards. And you'll see a pretty stark difference in the number of cheaters, which is a showing of over time the developers have added more anti-cheat methods or anti-cheat systems, and as a result, fewer people have cheated on those Rally Adventure leaderboards. Now, you obviously might want to know why the mainland Rivals leaderboard scores haven't been removed, and the answer is they have. The devs actually went through, a couple times over the last couple of years and purged most of the cheated scores. But I think, obviously with Forza Horizon 6 just being announced the other day, I think that the devs kind of have taken a step back from maintaining these leaderboards. Like I mentioned, you can't, maintaining leaderboards manually is a pretty extensive and involved task. So, I don't blame them for taking a step back and putting their efforts on a newer game. But for a good amount of time, they were updating a lot of leaderboards, and a lot of leaderboards were seeing the legitimate world record in the top 5, in the top 10, within the first window that you'd open in the Rivals menu. So their methods are effective. They are getting better. I have seen cheat clients go down, like I mentioned. If you go and find them, try them out, you'll probably get banned as a result. And I have faith in the devs to continue working on whatever solutions they have in mind for Forza Horizon 6 and come up with something hopefully more effective for a long-term solution where they don't have to, manually remove times, maybe better ways of tracking PR stunt scores. But fortunately, those are substantially more complicated than Rivals scores, as shown with that wheelie example. So those would be a little bit harder, but I have good hopes for Forza Horizon 6 and dealing with cheated scores, and I hope this video is educational in explaining different methods of dealing with scores and kind of the shortcomings of each, and the things you have to consider when trying to figure out how to actively approach anti-cheats in a video game.